Welcome everyone to the next edition of the AFL DK Down Under show, presented by dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. I'm your host here, Smatho10, and next to me is our AFL expert here, the Big Hef. We're here to break down the Friday night clash between the Essendon Bombers and the Collingwood Magpies. Hef, how are you today, mate?
Really good, Smatho. Always like watching these two teams butt heads. Never really know which team I want to see win, but if someone has a heartbreaking loss, that sits well with me.
Yes, we don't like these teams at all. So make sure you get to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au for all of our AFL content on our site. It is all free to use, our free projections, data tools, and our slate previews. We also have our previews on rotogrinders.com and with our DFR projections loaded into LineupHQ for AFL DraftKings contests. Hef, let's break down this particular match on Friday night. And we've got Collingwood here at the warm favourites at minus 222. The Bombers are the outsiders at plus 180. Currently, the total over and under is actually a very low 117.5, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the spread is currently around 13.5 points. The weather in Melbourne is not that great for Friday night on the forecast here on Wednesday. Currently, a very high chance of showers, currently at 90%, most likely in the afternoon and the evening. So how does that affect a daily fantasy contest when there's weather about there, F?
Well, there's sort of 2 points we should make here. The first is that this game is going to be at the MCG, and it is the best training ground in Australia without a question. So unless the rain actually comes during the game, I don't think the conditions will get too wet. If it does come during the game, then we really have to deal with Weather Dfs Strategy, which we're going to touch on now. The thing about AFL, when it's wet, it's harder to obviously catch and move the ball with precision like on a dry surface. So that tends to bring the players more around the ball as teams try and get numbers around the ball to push it forward and that sort of thing. So that results in a lot more stoppages than usual, which suits the ruckman from both teams. Every time there's a stoppage, obviously the ball goes in the air and it's the ruckman's job to try and hit it away, and they're right in the action basically a lot more than they would be in a free-flowing game. So ruckman definitely benefit from wet weather footy. In terms of what stats we can look for in wet weather footy, the obvious one is tackles. Guys who are really good at tackling and playing around the ball, they really benefit as well. These tackle numbers can go really big, and it gets really hard for guys to get cheap possessions. So the guys who rely on getting into space and getting marks for their possessions, often wingmen and flankers, halfback and half-forward flankers, they can find wet weather conditions much more difficult to score really high. And obviously the tall forwards, it makes their job a lot harder as well with trying to catch a really slippery wet ball with someone following them around all game. It doesn't make for much fun. So they're the adjustments we need to make if we're predicting a wet weather game. But just keep an eye on the weather there with the MCG because it can dry really well.
Yeah. So in summary, get a key ruckman, look for tacklers, and avoid keyed forwards. That's pretty simple rule for wet weather footy.
Yeah, that's a good formula there.
All right, so let's get stuck into this particular game on Friday night, and I'll quickly go through the team news because this is actually quite significant for fantasy here. So on Tuesday here in Australia, Collingwood's pretty much best fantasy midfielder, Steele Sidebottom, has breached the return to the game COVID protocols here in Australia by going out and about on the weekend. So he's actually going to be suspended by the league. We're not too sure how long for yet, but keep an eye on that. Also suspended is Essendon's premium midfielder, Zach Merritt. He gave a Carlton player a bit of a rib punch last week, and he will be serving 1 week on the sidelines. Collingwood lost their premium defender last week in Jeremy Howe. He had a gruesome knee injury against the Giants, so he's out for the season. So with those three particular players out in mind, it's going to open up some good fantasy spots, but with this weather around, we might be a bit constricted into who we choose here. So as always, Hef, let's start with the rucks, and we're going to have just pretty much two options on Friday night. We've got the mighty Brodie Grundy and the not so mighty Tom Bellchambers from the Bombers. What are your initial thoughts here for Friday?
Yeah, we had a good chat about this on the other show as well with Bill Chambers, who, Grundy has got him well covered for talent, but Bill Chambers is a really big, strong man. Maybe the wet weather conditions are going to suit him and detract a bit from Brodie Grundy, who he almost plays like another midfielder, the way he can move and handle the ball. He's expensive, but we're used to seeing Grundy expensive. Over 4,000 difference though with Bill Chambers. I'd have to lean to Grundy, especially for cash. But if you are able to make some lineups that you're really happy with, but have to play Bill Chambers in the ruck, I wouldn't be too scared to do so.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind Bill Chambers in GPP, but you're probably... What kind of split are you looking at then? 70-30, 60-40, 50-50?
I'm probably looking 60-ish. Grundy 60 to 70 there, I think. But Bill Chambers is definitely a good GPP option, that's for sure.
All right. Let's move on to defence, and we've also got a tough decision here with the defenders because we know Jeremy Howe, which was a great source of fantasy scoring. You would assume that Maynard at 6,500 will pick up his particular role, but already paying up for Grundy means we might have to start paying down, and there's a couple of players down here already that I've already got my eye on. Aaron Francis at 3,800 for the Bombers. He had a quite good game last week. Can we rely on these kind of cheaper defenders for this one, especially in the wet?
He's always shown a lot of potential, Francis. He's a taller defender though, and like we sort of say, wet conditions for the key forwards. It's also a bit the same for the key backs. The intercept marks are probably going to go down, as they're more likely to try and spoil the ball by playing it safe. So, I think that price is okay, Francis, but I'm almost looking towards more of the running types. I know we're getting back up in price here, but Jack Crisp is 6,100 is a really, really reasonable price for him, who almost acts like another midfielder at times for Collingwood. He's more of a medium size, so he's good with the ball on the ground. He's a guy I'm really looking for. In the similar mould for Essendon, we've got Jordan Ridley, who's a young player, so his salary hasn't quite caught up to him yet, I don't think, at 5,700, so he's definitely in play. And in terms of cheaper guys, I don't mind John Noble, 4,700. He's got the potential to return you a 60 or 70 playing with those guys down back there for Collingwood if they look to dominate the ball. So he's someone who we can save a bit of salary on as well.
All right, let's plug him in, a bit of Noble. I'm also liking a bit of Connor McKenna first up after his dramas of the last couple of weeks. He could bob up, and especially in these conditions, he could be a good tackler. So keep an eye on him as well.
It's really even position actually on this slate. These defenders, there's a lot of them with a decent ceiling, all around that sort of $4,000 to $6,000 range. One guy that we might point out if he does get a game, who's really cheap, is Matt Sharon, who I don't know if he's in line to replace Howe or not. But if he does get a game, then he's a guy you can play with a little bit of confidence at 3,100.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to the midfielders. So obviously we've no Sidebottom and Merritt for both sides. This makes this pool a bit more easy to choose from. Look, Taylor Adams, Adam Treloar in this particular bunch at over 7K. But there's no real standout midfielder now for the Bombers, apart from one guy you might want to talk about here.
You might want to clue me in on that one guy. Right?
I reckon Mr. McGrath from the Bombs.
Mr. McGrath, he's the guy that's
starting to get the keys to the team here, I reckon.
Yeah, he's a guy that's played in the back line for most of his career so far, and now he's getting a lot of time in the centre bounces. But his salary is sort of reflecting his role more so than his output at 7,600. I think he's pretty well priced up for what he's been delivering so far. I'd prefer to play Dylan Shield myself, he's more a traditional midfielder. He's been there for years. Doesn't get a heap of attention because his kicking is a little bit dodgy, but he's definitely got a really high ceiling, Shield, and I'm sure wet conditions isn't going to worry him too much. Let's just talk a bit about roles, because here in Australia we know that the impact that Adam Treloar has had on Taylor Adams, but our American fans might not be so aware of this. Now, Taylor Adams, his fantasy career has revolved around whether he's able to play in the middle as the main inside midfielder. When he gets that role, he scores really well, which we've seen from him this year. The problem for him is that Collingwood also have this guy called Adam Treloar, who also likes to play that role, and over time he's probably played that role a little bit better than Adams. So when Treloar's in the team, he tends to dominate and really affect Adams's output. With Treloar $1,000 cheaper on this slate, definitely, if they were both 100% fit, you would lean to Treloar pretty much every day of the week. But this is his first game back from injury. They have said he's had a couple of really good scratch matches coming into this game to prove he's over his injury worries. So I'm happy to back them in and lean to Treloar over Adams.
Now, if it is wet weather footy here on Friday night, there is a particular player that you must consider, and that's Collingwood's leading tackler in Rupert Wheels at 5,300. You can only look back through the DFR tools on our site to show that he has multiple games of high tackles. Like even the finals last year, he had at least 10 tackles per game. So at that particular price and these conditions, 5,300 seems to be almost a lock on this particular slate. Would you agree?
I like your thinking there, Smatho. I don't know if I'd quite go as far to say as a lock, but he's got the role and he's got the game for wet weather footy, that's for sure.
Now I'm scrolling down here to find a bit of value, and there's nothing really sticking out here. Is there anything that you're seeing at below 5,000?
There's a couple of guys who probably aren't as well suited to wet weather footy as you'd like if that rain comes, but two guys that sort of stand out to me here are Darcy Parrish for Essendon, with Merritt out of the team. Now, Merritt wasn't getting a lot of centre bounce time, but he was definitely spending time off a wing and as part of that Essendon midfield. So with him out of the team, someone's got to step up and take that role. Darcy Parrish has been stuck playing forward, but we've seen him score really well in the past when he's played in the midfield, and he scored way better than that $5,100 salary would suggest. So he's definitely a guy that you've got to sprinkle through some of your GPP lineups, just in case he gets given that role that he'll thrive on. And a guy from Collingwood who's coming off a really poor game against GWS is Chris Mayne. He's at 4,500. He's a bit of a favourite of mine, Mayne. He likes the wide open spaces of the G, and I always like playing Mayne in my lineups when I'm playing two Collingwood defenders because he links up really well with the defenders. We talked about correlations in the video on Thursday night's game. Mayne is a guy that can save you a bit of salary and can link up well with your defenders. So play him in the right kind of lineups, I think.
Now, as we alluded to earlier in the show, forwards do have a hard time when the footy is wet. So you've got to be careful here in terms of avoiding your key forwards. And obviously one name sticks out straight away that you could possibly put a line through, and that is Mason Cox for Collingwood, unfortunately, our bigger Oklahoma product. He's currently at 3,900. In saying that, though, in the wet, he does do backup ruckman, so there could be a bit more opportunity for him around the stoppages. Yes or no on Cox?
Lean no.
Yeah.
I'll lean no. But it's a good point you make about the extra stoppages for the ruckman, and he does play in the ruck when Brodie Grundy's having a break. But the shorter quarters means he's probably not going to get as much time in there as what we're used to seeing. And a slippery footy, he wasn't really marking the ball too well last week. Slippery footy's only going to make that more difficult. So, it's hard to see Cox have a really big game in wet conditions.
Now, we talked about Rupert Wheels being the premium tackler for the Pies. We've also got one for the Bombers, and that is Devon Smith at 6,200. Could we see a bit more of a fantasy-friendly game from Smith in the wet?
Yeah, he's a tough little bugger, Smith. Sort of like I was touching on with Parrish, with the opportunity for one of these bomber players to get more of a midfield role. We think back a couple of years, Devon Smith was playing pretty much as a full-time midfielder, so he's very capable if they throw him the keys and get him up the ground there. And if that was to happen, then that 6,200 price tag is too cheap for him. But even if playing up forward, I can see in wet conditions, they'll send those half forwards sort of into the midfield to get more numbers around the ball. So he'd be a guy that would get around the ball more often under those circumstances. So he's definitely playable for me, Devon Smith.
Especially half forwards for the Collingwood as well. We've got players such as Jordan De Goey and Jamie Elliott, and also Stringer for Essendon as well. They're all around that high 4,000 mark. So they're not exactly cash plays, but they are very good GP plays that one or two of these guys can actually get some midfield time, get some tackling, get those scrubby kicks, scrubby handballs, and all of a sudden they're doing quite well in fantasy.
Yeah, just get the feeling that one of those guys are going to be in the winning lineups, priced under 5,000 there. We know De Goey gets a lot of centre bounce time this year. Whether Treloar coming back affects that, it's probably going to happen to a small degree, but Jamie Elliott got a lot of time in there last week as well. So I reckon De Goey would be more likely to hold his role than Elliott, who'd be more likely to push back further up forward. But De Goey's he's an absolute bull, so he's got a great build for wet weather footy too. And one of those. And Stringer's the same for Essendon. He's a really strong body. Gets around he gets in the centre bounces because he's so good in those stoppage situations, and he usually pushes forward. But if it's wet weather footy and there's a lot more stoppages, you could definitely see them using Stringer a lot more around the ball than they otherwise would. So it's all about opportunity, and those price tags. Both of those guys have definitely got the opportunity to outperform them.
Excellent. All right, Hef, we'll leave it there for this particular match. As I said, keep an eye on dailyfantasyrankings.com.au for our cheat sheets, our projections, all the tools that you need. Keep an eye on our social media. We'll give you updates in terms of what's happening with the weather and teams, etc. for this Friday night clash. Hef will be back next week. Going to break down some more games. We're not too sure who's playing yet because obviously the situation is pretty dire here in Melbourne at the moment. So keep an eye out for future contests. Hef, thanks for joining me today, mate.
Thank you. Good luck to everyone.
And we'll see you next time on the DK Down Under Show. Catch you later.
Cheers.